Hey guys, MrPokke here, back with another video, and on today's episode of Early Access Review, we are going to be taking a look at our latest first and only S-rank defense class agent, Caesar. After playing her with a little bit, she definitely packs one of the most universal kits in Zone 0, offering excellent survival comfort, great day speed, as well as team-wide attack and damage buffs. We will be discussing her character kit, playstyle, W engine, drive discs, Mindscape, and team comps all in this video, so without further ado, let's get into today's content. Subscribe! Also, this turns out to be my 1000th video on YouTube, so yippee. Alright, jumping right into Caesar's character kit, the summary from what I found is she plays very similarly to Coleda, which is basically like a burst stunner, utilizing her sword parries and EX parries to generate our shields and build up the daze bar. And then once we're done using her skills, we will quickly swap back to the main DPS again, and her on-field time is honestly very short, since her kit, her basic attack, doesn't really have a lot of value compared to the parry assist as well as the EX skill. Caesar's main gimmick comes from her team-wide shield, Radiant Aegis. It is an extremely comfortable shield that lasts for 90 seconds while providing a whopping 1000 attack buff, as well as anti-interrupt, which can be extremely useful for long attack chain animation DPSs, notably being Ellen as well as Soldier 11. Caesar also has the perfect block/parry counter that applies a debuff to all enemies, increasing the damage they take by 25% for 30 seconds. So generally speaking, all of the buffs, all of the shields that Caesar provides, they last for an incredible amount of time, and players should have no issue maintaining 100% uptime for any of the buffs, right? So now jumping into the basic attack, it is like a 6-hit combo, but we are pretty much never going to be using this under most scenarios, despite the extremely cool attack animations, unless we are going to be building a M6 DPS Caesar. That being said, we would use her heavy attack, which consumes 1 assist point, which is the point you use to perform parry in Zone 0, to pull in our enemies in a small radius together, and is a very nice grouping mechanic, while also applying the 25% increased damage buff. Now, note that for this specific 25% increase in damage buff, it appears to be a damage percentage buff instead of a damage vulnerability buff, because this is not a raw 25% final damage increase. Generally, we would be using Caesar's heavy to instantly start the fight and group up all of the mobs together, mark our debuff, parry / using our EX skill to activate our shield, then swap into our main DPS to perform our damage output, right? So that is basically for the basic, and then jumping into a skill, which is pretty much gonna be a whole lot of essay. This is one of the longest descriptions for a skill I've ever seen in my entire life, but fundamentally, it is extremely simple. First of all, it has 40 energy cost, which is the lowest energy cost skill in the entire game. It's 40, 60, or 80, right? Or we'll essentially use this skill to parry, gain Radiant Aegis, and then we'll gain the buffs for our entire team. It is very easy to use, very cheap, and very forgiving, so players should have no issues getting used to this entire mechanic. Keep in mind that even if you do not have 40 energy, we can still perform the perfect block and trigger a counter damage, although the multiplier is much lower and we cannot provide the team-wide shield. Generally, we will not be using this unless energy is available. That being said, so with energy, our EX skill as well as the parry counter will be Caesar's bread and butter ability, granting us the team-wide shield while being able to follow up with a very solid daze multiplier hits, with both the parry as well as the follow-up coming at a roughly combined 800% daze multiplier. So this is going to be Caesar's main method of gaining shield and building daze bar, hence why she feels more like a burst dazer similar to Coleda, because she will essentially only be on field either if you use her for your parry assist or use her for your EX skill to perform the parry herself. Keep in mind the last line, she also gains a 20% impact increase for 3 seconds with every perfect block counter or parry counter, which further improves the daze while signifying to us, the player, that her role is a burst dazer, since the buff only lasts for a very short 3 seconds. Speaking about the parry counter, which is going to be the assist, dodge counter is almost never used, while the assist counter or the parry is going to be having a lot of usage, having one of, if not the highest daze multipliers in the entire game, with 580% on the heavy counter at the 534.5% assist follow-up. So if we want to take into consideration her base stats, which is 123 impact, if we were to use our 2-piece impact, getting our W engine, 20% impact damage increase from the 3-second buff, she will reach an in-game impact of 212, which is extremely high. That being said, through the testings that I've played using her, she's not going to be breaking as fast as our traditional stunners like Coleda or Qingyi, but she definitely is completely fine as a stunner role despite being in the defense class, while offering a ton of utility built into her kit. Her ultimate, it is also pretty much never going to be used. We're always going to be saving this from main DPS like Jane or Ellen, right? 100% days increase for shielded enemies. It might be useful in some niche scenarios to improve our days uptime, especially if the enemies do have a lot of days. And if the shield is going to be tied to breaking the enemy as fast as possible, we might see some usage for Caesar's ultimate, right? So that's the ultimate. And finally, going into the core skill. First of all, the 6 nodes are going to be base, impact, as well as attack, both of which are going to be quite useful for a kid. And then for her main core skill is where all the buffs are coming from, right? So I'm going to be condensing everything into this specific segment right here. So first of all, she gains a 1400% impact and a 1400 shield. And roughly in battle, this will equip to around a 5000 shield, and it is more than capable of tanking through a lot of different hits before we need to refresh a shield again. This shield lasts for 90 seconds and is equipped by the on-field character with the value shared amongst the entire team. And keep in mind, any single instance of damage will not exceed the shield value, which means even if the shield has like 1 HP remaining, and if you get hit with a super powerful hit, it will not go into your HP. And this is going to be extremely comfortable, especially with some of the newer enemies that we'll be facing in the endgame content. They're extremely aggressive and deals tremendous damage. And an excellent example is going to be the Shadow Jane Does that we have faced in the story before, right? So the example is that with the shield, we also gain the anti-interrupt built in, which allows our unit to pretty much tank through most, if not every single attack that we are facing in the endgame content. This is going to be a excellent experience if we're going to be using units that has a very long attack animation, such as Ellen. In theory, this might not look like a very big DPS increase, but in a practical scenario in Xenosaga Zone Zero, it is a very nice DPS increase, because now Ellen can perform a full enhanced base attack chain without dodging or cancelling out of the attack animation if she's gonna get hit. She can just finish the whole thing while getting hit, which is going to be where majority of Ellen's damage come from, which is the final hit of the attack animation, right? So very nice utility built in over here. And I don't believe there's any other utility we have in the entire game that offers this amount of anti-interrupt. And then another buff is going to be a 1000 flat attack buff. And keep in mind, this 1000 flat attack buff is going to be at any level. Even if you only have a level 1 core skill, it is still going to be a 1000 attack buff. The value for leveling up the core skill is mainly tied to the radiant shield amount, right? This is going to be excellent for new players or teams without a very good build to drastically improve our baseline attack. And this will last until the shield expires, which is 90 seconds plus another 5 seconds on top of that. And 90 seconds is a ridiculously long time. Most of the time, you are going to get this shield broken before applying again, because this shield is meant to be broken anyways, right? You want to stand there, tank through the damage while dealing your damage, and then you want to reapply the shield. So you will probably never run out based on the timer alone. I would say this will have a very high uptime, especially considering her energy cost is only 40. Lastly, her additional ability, Battle Spirit. This is activated whenever there's another character that has a defensive assist or is from the same faction, which is pretty much every single unit in the game, except for like 4 units with a perfect dodge assist, like Chu Yuan, Grace, and etc. If we were to activate our perfect block, retaliation, defensive assist, or basic attack dead end, which is the grouping mechanic, Caesar would then apply a debuff effect to the enemy within a 7-meter radius, increasing the damage they take from all teammates by 25% for 30 seconds. Like I mentioned, this is likely going to be damage percentage and not vulnerability, but nonetheless, it is still a very good debuff. So that is essentially it for Caesar's character kit. It might look that there's a lot of words, especially her EX skill, but fundamentally, she is a very simple unit to understand as well as to master. You want to use her when you have your EX energy to perform the parry, or you want to use her main DPS and then swap into Caesar to perform the parry herself, and then you basically just swap back into your main DPS or your support to provide her buffs. She is very much a burst dazer, like I mentioned, using her only if you have your EX skill or if you want to use her to the parry, build up your days, get your buffs, get out. So it's a very simple unit, and she can pretty much be slotted into almost any team right now. You can start with your main DPS, you can start with your crit DPS, long DPS, burst DPS, all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, I find myself having the best experience from 2 different teams, namely the team with Jane Doe, as well as the team with Ellen, where she's going to be replacing Lycon's role in Ellen. And for Jane Doe, we are likely going to be using her instead of Seth. And when Bernice comes out, this is probably going to be the premium anomaly team, right? So that is going to be there. And now talking about her W engine, Tusks of Fury. 18% impact, and the effect is the shield value provided by the equiper increases by 30% when any squad member triggers interrupt or perfect dodge. All squad member damage increased by 18% and days dealt increased by 12% for 20 seconds. And this effect will not stack. I would say that this is a very good general W engine that can be pretty much made use of by any defense class units. That being said, we only really have 3 defense class units, so we don't really know how well they're going to be functioning with future defense class units coming out. But for Caesar, this is definitely going to be an excellent W engine, since with the baseline impact 18%, as well as another days that will increase by 12% for the entire team, this is going to allow Caesar to break a lot faster. Is it going to be mandatory? I don't think it's going to be as game-changing as compared to a Mindscapes, which we'll talk about later, especially considering that one of our best free-to-play options is going to be the craftable W engine A rank from the shop, right? Which will basically increase our impact by 10% for 12 seconds, as well as giving us a little bit of HP, right? Since Caesar's main role is going to be functioning as a dazer, then this impact is going to be very, very nice. Another one that's going to be quite good is going to be Spring's Embrace, which is another one I mentioned for Seth's early access review, giving us the reduced damage taken as well as increasing energy regeneration rate. And this buff does get transferred to the ally whenever we swap around. So any of these options would be really, really good for Caesar. Then jumping into our builds for Caesar, the 4-piece is definitely going to be our latest Drive Dissect Proto Punk 2-piece Shoot Fef plus 50%. And when any squad member triggers a defensive assist or evasive assist, all squad members deals 15% increased damage lasting 10 seconds. This is pretty much going to be built for Caesar, and there really isn't much to talk about. Activate this, activate this, activate this. That's pretty much it. So for our 2-piece, however, it is a kind of a toss-up between either Swing Jazz or Shock Star Disco. If you want 20% energy regeneration to perform more parries, then Swing Jazz is going to be the choice. Me personally, I do prefer the 2-piece 6% impact from Shock Star Disco, just to get a little bit more of a push, especially since Caesar's role in my team is going to be acting as a dazer, right? I wouldn't really care that much about the energy regeneration to perform our perfect block, because I can always make use of the assist parry to generate the shield from Caesar anyways, right? So it is not that significant. I don't really need to use this EX skill all the time. Whereas on the other hand, the Shock Star Disco 2-piece is going to give us a little bit more impact for all of our hits. So it really depends on the playstyle you're going for. Do you want a more and faster perfect block, which then in turn translates into more shields, or do you want to just deal more impact damage for every single one of hit, right? So it really depends on the player. Me myself, I do prefer the 2-piece impact a little bit more. And then for our main stats for our 4, 5, 6 is also quite straightforward. For our slot 6 is 100% going to be our impact percentage, because she is going to be serving as a dazer. For our slot 5 is going to be attack percentage or physical damage percentage, whichever one you want to choose for. And then for our slot 4, if you want to go for crit, it is technically her best in slot choice, especially if you manage to get a lot of crit rate and crit damage subsets. But if you can't get good subsets, then attack percentage made for a slot 4 is going to be completely fine. You are generally just going to be going for damage in the main stats while ensuring that she deals impact from the slot 6, and that is pretty much it for the builds. And finally, about Caesar's Mindscapes. Her Mindscape one is going to be one of, if not the best Mindscapes one that I've seen in the longest time. Spirit Advance, when we enter combat or switch in, she instantly buffs the team with a Radiant Aegis, which will reduce the reliance that we have for the 40 energy EX skill, allowing us to refresh the shield more frequently. Although this can only be triggered once every 300 seconds, so you're basically going to be getting this once per battle, and that's pretty much it. Unless you're going for a super long drawn out fight, this will not be that important. The more important thing is gonna be when Radiant Aegis is active, enemies within a 5-meter radius of the shield bearer suffer a 15% attribute damage res reduction. This is basically the same as if you guys play Honkai Star Rail, E1 Robin, which is basically a flat-out res penetration, right? So this is going to be an extremely powerful Mindscape 1, and if you guys are considering the value between the Mindscape 1 or signature weapon, then Mindscape 1 is definitely going to have a lot more value if you're considering pulling for Caesar, right? So that's going to be that. For the Mindscape 2 Legacy of the Far Lands, while Radiant Aegis is active during core passive Barrier of Resilience, energy regeneration increased by 10%, and the shield bearer's attack boost increased to 150% of the original value. Generally speaking, this is more or less just for comfort to activate our perfect block a little bit more frequently while making our attack buff 1500 instead of 1000. For units with very good builds, especially if you already have like your excellent crit ratio, damage percentage, attack, then this increment of 50% of the attack is not gonna be that significant. Between Mindscape 1 and Mindscape 2, Mindscape 1 definitely has a lot more value to be had over there. For the Mindscape 4, Aegis of the Battering Ram, when we use a chain attack or ultimate, we will gain 3 additional assist points. And if our energy is below 20, she can activate EX special attack with 1 assist point instead, triggered every 5 seconds. This will drastically reduce the reliance on Caesar King's EX skill, and we can pretty much make use of the assist points to trigger our perfect block, which means we can refresh our shield more frequently. This is also more or less like Mindscape 2, which is gonna be for a comfort Mindscape. If you just want to have a little bit more leeway, especially for the team-wide parries, for more shields, then this is gonna be a very decent Mindscape. And finally, jumping into Mindscape 6 Overlord's Will, EX special attack and assist follow-up is guaranteed to do a critical hit. The skill's damage is increased by 50% with an additional damage of 50% dealt to the primary target. And when we use our EX special attack or the assist follow-up, her crit rate is increased by 30% and crit damage increased by 60% for 15 seconds. So this Mindscape 6 is basically turns our Caesar into like more or less a main DPS. So you can definitely start building her a lot more offensively, making use of her on battle a lot more frequently compared to the traditional burst Dazer role, right? So that is only for players that want to play her like a main DPS. Generally speaking, I think Caesar's most impactful Mindscape is definitely going to be the Mindscape 1, and everything else is going to be more for comfort, and then Mindscape here is when you just want to go for the main DPS route. And now finally we have come to Caesar King's team section. The team role for Caesar is essentially gonna be a mix between both a Dazer as well as a utility provider. While in the Dazer portion, like I mentioned, she is more like a burst Dazer, relying on her EX skill as well as the parry assist. Against enemies that are extremely aggressive in the end game, such as the Shadow Jane Doe or even the new enemies that might be coming out in the future, having this additional shield and comfort is gonna be invaluable because no other unit can really provide this aside from maybe Big Ben, which is another unit that can make use of the perfect block, right? So for enemies that are going to be hitting us very frequently as well as very heavily, Caesar can continuously apply our perfect parries, accumulate our days, and stacking on all of our debuffs onto the target. So that is going to be a very nice utility. So ideally, she is going to be like quote-unquote like a Dazer and support both 2-in-1 for our main damage dealer. For the most part, she can function in pretty much any team, but the two things that stand out especially are going to be for Ellen's team, where you run Ellen, Caesar, as well as Sokaku, as well as the Jane Doe team with Jane Doe, Seth, as well as Caesar. In the future, when Bernice comes out, then Bernice will very likely replace Seth, looking into Jane Doe, Caesar, as well as Bernice, right? So these two, in my opinion, are going to be some of the more optimal team comps. You can use her in other teams. So for example, you can definitely still use Caesar with Zhu Yuan, but generally speaking, Qing Yi is going to offer us a lot more damage compared to Caesar. And on the same note, Qing Yi's stun damage multiplier increase, it can also be very useful for units like Jane Doe, as I mentioned in my previous video. But the key thing to know is that the difference between Caesar King as well as other Dazers like Koleda or Qing Yi is not strictly tied to the daze value or even the damage multipliers, right? It is more tied to the comfort, because what I've noticed is that when I was using Qing Yi, even though she's an excellent Dazer, when she gets hit, it is going to be quite a bit of health, especially for the new endgame content that we are going to be facing. So having the additional comfort and the shield offered by Caesar, it sometimes doesn't translate into like theoretical damage output numbers, right? It really depends on the comfort of the player themselves. And if you guys do find yourselves having a lot more comfort Shogun playing Caesar King in your team instead of like any of the other Dazers, then she is definitely going to be offering a lot of value to your account. At the end of the day, as I mentioned, Zenless Zone Zero is a game about players' pilot experience, and I do believe that Caesar King offers a very high amount of comfort while being universal in pretty much any single team coin you can think of, right? A few other DPS there has a pretty long attack animation is, for example, Piper's spin, right? Because one of the problems that Piper has in the spin is that she takes a lot of damage while channeling her skill, and if we do give Caesar King to Piper, then that's gonna fix a lot of these problems while making her a lot tankier. Another thing is also gonna be Corinne's EX skill. It also channels for a very long time, or even Anton. So all these kind of like long attack animations, even if they're not using Ellen, Caesar will also find a role in this kind of like A rank agents or future S rank agents that have a very long attack animation. So yeah, with that, we have come to the end of Caesar King's early access review. I try to condense a lot of information in this video, try to make it a little bit more concise and kind of testing out new things, especially since this is going to be my 1000th video, right? So, and this is probably going to be my final video before I'm flying off to the Land of the Freehold of the Brave. So thank you guys so much for all the support on the channel. Word of the day is gonna be Boar. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord. All the best for Caesar proofs, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.